my interest in Latin America began when I left England to do graduate work in sociology in the University of Chicago. There I specialized in the sociology of education, nothing to do with Latin America whatsoever. But the woman that I was meeting then, who is still my wife, and had a sister who was studying the University of Mexico, the National University, and in one of those dreadful Chicago cold, winters, we decided to go down to Mexico over the whole Christmas, New Year period, etc. And it was a wonderful experience. We're talking now about 1962. And in 62, Mexico was limpid. It was, you'd go out and you could see the snow-clad, volcanoes above the city. There was very little pollution at that stage. Traffic was not bad, etc. And, for a naive, left-leaning Brit, it was, kind of politically interesting country. It had apparently a revolutionary government in power, the Partido Revolucionario Institucional. And the friends that my wife's sister had, some of them were friends actually from the United States, were an artistic group in Mexico who themselves were, yes, quite left-wing. They discussed politics in a way that we did not discuss politics in Chicago. But also they, they were left, but they supported the regime because the regime supported them. They were, because they were parts of the graphics movement in Mexico, and they did get public support for publishing things in education, etc. So Sue, my wife, and myself said, right, if we have a chance, let's do research in Mexico. First job was at the University of Manchester in north of England, still as a sociologist of education, but that was an anthropology-dominated department in which everybody tended to work outside the country. And so you didn't really work inside the country, though the department made efforts to do so, but the whole pressure was to work outside. And so the opportunity came up, ironically, because Richard Adams, who then was, at that stage, had been brought in to be the head of the anthropology department here in the University of Texas. He came to Europe because he had for those times, a large Ford Foundation grant to do work in Central America. And he contacted Max Gluckman, who was a very well-known Manchester anthropologist at the time, saying, do you have anybody who's interested? My colleagues who had worked mainly in Africa and Middle East were not interested in Latin America. I volunteered. And on the promise that I would read a whole list of books on anthropology that Gluckman provided, etc., take tutorials even, then he said, I'll recommend you to Adams. And so I came to the University of Texas. I took some very badly taught language courses in Manchester to do some preliminary language training here in Texas, but also as a postdoc fellow at the Institute of Latin American Studies in 1966. So now we're talking 50 years ago when I first saw this campus. And that was the beginning of the interest. It never left. I'd worked in various countries of Latin America, but I had an interest in all of them, because my approach has always tended to be historical comparative. And if you want to do that, it's a good idea not to become a specialist, say, just on Guatemala, which some people do that and do excellent work on it. But my interest was other. I wanted to see how Guatemala differed, say, in terms of its peasant or indigenous structures to Peru, and so on and so forth. And so geographically, I always saw myself as a comparative Latin Americas in a geographical sense, though my expertise, detailed expertise, is much more, of course, in Mexico, Central America, especially Guatemala, the Andean region to a certain extent, and then the Southern Cone, etc. Brazil, I have a reasonable knowledge of, but I don't feel that competent. And anyway, we have first-rate specialists here at duty on Brazil, so that was not a problem. Now, in terms of themes, my interest was, again, quite general. I mean, I was interested really in social and economic development. Within that, the whole issue of urbanization and urban development, urban sociology, if you want, and within that, poverty. And then, as time went on, and that time, that was the time of the directorship, I'd become more and more interested in the whole question of social policy and citizenship. Citizenship is a more theoretical idea, an aspiration, if you want, and social policy is the practical ways of trying to make things better. Well, the problem, I think, with U.S. Latin American relations, U.S. Mexican relations, whatever it is, that they've never really been very good. And there's been, on the whole, to my mind, and talking now as a European outsider perhaps, there's been an indifference on the part of the American administration to Latin America, other than over the purely political issues, of course, the whole period of communism and anti-communism, etc., which dominated so much American policy. That in Guatemala, that was so obvious, of course, because the American government had colluded with the coup d'etat against Arbenz in Guatemala, partly because of the interests of the United Fruit Company, partly because of the fears of communism and so on and so forth. And we know that history keeps repeating. Well, in Chile, we know much more about the whole American intervention at that period now than we did then. So, okay, so communism disappears, 89, 90, those kind of periods. But it's not as if it's replaced by anything very much more positive. I think it was replaced much more by America heaving a sigh of relief and saying, now we can concentrate on our real interests, Middle East, of course. So let's get into the Middle East and make sure the oil is there. Remember a time when America didn't realize it had an awful lot of oil itself, through fracking and goodness knows what else. So let's secure our oil reserves. Latin America didn't seem to be that interested, and they'd gone and nationalized the petroleum anyway. And so it was not a period in which you felt, oh my goodness me, you were riding a crest of the wave, strong American interest and administrative interests or private interests in Latin America. No, I mean, to me, and I think, from other directors too, the whole issue was, look, it's our job to try to make Latin America a more, prominent and obvious part of the American political and agenda. America is different from Britain, or different than Britain of my day. In the Britain of my day, it's changed now a bit, is, academics basically control policy through committees. It was quite hierarchical, but it was the academics that did it, not administrators. Administrators just administrated. America is very different. Administrators make policy, academics get on with their own work, and universities are very good that way. They say, do what you want, teach what you want, we don't worry, but as long as you don't, violate, the different ordinances we have, but you can do what you want. But in terms of policy issues, like, for example, do we establish relationships with another country, another university, et cetera, do we propagate this? They're very, very wary. So their willingness to support in Latin American initiatives depends a great deal on whether it's in the interest of the administration or not. Bill Powers is president, who was, of course, is a legal scholar, etc. Very interested. He had personal interest too, because one of his students was soon to become Supreme Judge, one of the Supreme Court judges in Brazil. So he was very interested in leading a delegation to Brazil, which would target law, an exchange between law schools, etc. So that was going. Then we tagged along, as you know, and did our own kind of exchanges. Made use of it was one of the LASA conferences, if I remember, in Rio there to do it. But the Mexico thing, we were pushing, but it was the administration that wanted to to make the agenda on that. But we had good collaboration ultimately with them, and so we managed to get an agenda that, to my mind, was balanced between Colegio de Mexico and the anthropology places, and also then the technological and public affairs kind of things. The last visit that was done recently with the new president here has been much more clearly targeted towards STEMs type interests. And there's a clear university interest in developing technology and science relationships with Mexico on that, but that's what they'll target. They have much less interest in developing humanities, social science, trying to. Of course, Randy did go, and and there was meetings with, I think, mainly CSs, because obviously the institute that Lila still has, an agreement with. When I took over in 2006, it was a very good moment to take over the institute. Because at that stage, the Lozana Long Endowment, remember Joe and Teresa Lozana Long had endowed the Institute with $10 million. And so that came to fruition in about 1996, where you really had a substantial income coming in from the endowment, which could be used mainly for student loans, but for other things too. At the same time, the administration, liberal arts administration, Randy Deal when he became dean, but before that, Richard Flores as the senior deal, and really moved towards putting some of the monies that liberal arts had controlled over Latin American studies into the Institute's hands. So we then had a total endowment, I think we calculated once, it was probably near to about 20 million, which is fairly substantial in terms of income flow. Of course, this is also counting the Title VI grant, which was current at the time as well. And so that all of this made possible to do things. I suppose what I'm proud of, but with a great deal of help from Paloma and others, like that actually we did do things, with that money. There was a lot of things that we did and could do. On the administrative side, it was fairly obvious, and Joe Long was pushing on that we needed an advisory council to really spearhead a development effort. We recruited our first kind of development officer, well, not kind of, a first development officer, Marco Munoz, to work on these kind of things. And then with an advisory council, the idea was to try to raise money. And I can't say we were enormously successful. We nearly got an endowment from Miguel Alemán, the ex-governor of Veracruz, to establish a Mexican center with an endowment. And unfortunately, though he had agreed to it and his board had agreed, it coincided with a huge drop. Well, the years we're beginning to talk about, the years in the financial markets. And so that didn't become possible, but we aimed for that. The other thing we did, which seemed to be kind of necessary in the general kind of move towards greater democracy everywhere, was to establish a proper executive committee for LILAS that would be elected. It was an elected committee, and would meet on a regular basis and have subcommittees and advise the director, etc., and indeed take votes on many issues. Now, having done that, part of the other thing was then an attempt to centralize, which I think we did successfully. I mean, that's still in debate. To centralize more LILAS and financing in LILAS. What that meant was that we would use the LILAS monies that we had at our disposal really to finance conferences that were really sponsored by LILAS, not by individuals or individual departments, which had tended to be the tradition in the past. And of course, that meant you still wanted, people from departments, obviously, to participate and do things and put together, kind of proposals on this. And as far as possible, to make that interdisciplinary, and also to topics that not only joined people from different departments, but also were themselves fairly interdisciplinary. Also, we wanted to get conferences going, and we had several conferences, a very good conference, actually, that tended to be quite political science in its orientation, on democracy in Latin America, pairing countries. And Venezuela, I remember, being one of those countries. Chile must have been another, and so on. We also used the occasion of conferences, wherever possible, to invite high-profile speakers to LILAS. We got 3 presidents of Latin America, 3 ex-presidents of Latin America, to come and talk to us. Fernando Enrique Cardoso came and gave a very, very nice talk indeed here in the LBJ auditorium. But we also had Ricardo Lagos, who gave an excellent talk, and that was in the context of the Democracy Conference, if I remember. And so we could use the speakers of the conference to dialogue with Ricardo Lagos. And actually, he sat in on the conference and raised his hand and asked questions. It was a really good kind of things. And then finally, it was Ernesto Zedillo, who gave a first-rate talk. This is my own personal opinion. To my mind, some of the most impressive presidents of Mexico that I've experienced. I've seen a lot of them like that, and he gave an excellent talk. That was more in the context of our interests in migration issues, and other kinds of things. We had a conference on that, but Zedillo talked generally about global relations, which he's increasingly specialized on, etc. So doing that seemed to me, a good way of putting the Institute's name in the public eye, and helping the Institute to get Latin American specialists together on different issues. Those things, I think, was a great thing we did. Other things we did, one of them is the Olmec head, which is out there now. You can all see that, and the Olmec head was actually an idea of Marco Muñoz's, and because he had good friends in the administration of the University of Veracruz, which owns the heads, and the state of Veracruz, which obviously would have to be involved in this. What they've done, and they've made copies. They have a master sculptor who does a precise copy of one of the great Olmec heads that they have in their museum. Precise copy, same stone, and you hardly could tell the difference between that one and the one in the University of Veracruz. And they've given it to Tokyo and various other places. So they said, yes, we'll give one to the University of Texas at Austin too. Wonderful. The only snag was we had to get the money for it, which was not insubstantial. I forget how much, but probably about $80,000 for the transport of it. Because to move a thing like that is huge. You put in big lorries and everything like that. And that, of course, leads to one of the anecdotes I remember of that time was because we spent quite a lot of time actually getting the money together to bring this head here, etc. And with great relief, and it had to go through university committees. Does the University of Texas want an Olmec head on its campus, etc.? And they all had to approve this, and we had to get letters from distinguished people saying, yes, the University of Texas should have one, etc. So then, sigh of relief, all was agreed, and the Olmec head began trundling from Veracruz to here. Then, minor panic. We received a call that the Olmec head had been stopped at the border with the United States because it did not have the right documents. It was an undocumented migrant. And so unfortunately, with again a lot more effort, we got the right documents, and it finally came here and was established here. We had a very nice meeting, and the governor of Veracruz came, and President of the university, but various dignitaries were here, and Miguel Alemán, I think, also came to that meeting. It's a very nice ceremony we had, and you will see the plaque, talking about the gift by the governor of Veracruz, etc. So those are, the other kind of things I should mention is that we did get started. The idea was Nick Shumway's, but it was, but also Caroline and Virginia were also involved in this. The starting of Portal, the magazine. The issue was they had a nice idea, and when we talk over and we were talking about this with Bryan, we said, well, look, why don't we have a magazine like Berkeley and other kinds of things do? And so Caroline said, well, yes, no, Nick, why don't we've really been prepared an agenda for this. Look, we can give you these kind of things, etc. But of course, the issue was, as always, money. You'd been a bit worried about where the money was coming from. But as I said, that was not a real problem for us. The money was there, let's spend it, for heaven's sake, and that seemed a good cause. So we started Portal. The first edition came out in the winter of my first term in my first semester of being director, and then it's gone on since. It's been a commitment, and to me, I think it's a very nice magazine. So the various kinds of things that happened, but basically it was partly luck and having very good people to work with.